Xin chào các bạn. Đừng đừng quên đăng ký kênh của chúng tôi để nhận những cập nhật mới nhất và nghe thêm nhiều thông tin hấp dẫn khác nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi. She sat quietly on her porch, the rocking chair creaking softly with the rhythm of the evening. The sun had just begun its descent behind the trees, casting a golden glow over the worn wood of the house. Clara Jefferson, 76, had lived in this house longer than anyone could remember. It was her sanctuary, her place of peace, where she had weathered life's storms. And this evening was no different. Her chamomile tea sat on the small table beside her, steam rising gently from the chipped mug that read, Black and Proud Since 63. She wasn't thinking of much, just the warmth of the day fading into the coolness of dusk. It was a peaceful moment, one she had claimed for herself in a world that often tried to make her invisible. But everything changed when two officers appeared at the end of her driveway, their polished black and white cruiser rumbling down the street like a warning. They didn't realize it yet, but they were about to step into something far bigger than a simple call. They were about to challenge a woman who had weathered far more than they could ever imagine. And they didn't understand that what they thought would be an easy arrest was, in fact, a clash between dignity and assumption, power and prejudice. The officers, still unsure of what they were walking into, approached her porch with an air of authority. Little did they know, they were facing a woman who had long ago learned to stand firm in the face of injustice. Clara's eyes, wise with the weight of history, met theirs with a quiet strength. She had seen this before, the suspicion, the judgment, the fear of the unknown. But today, she wasn't moving. Today, she wasn't going to let them rewrite her story. Clara Jefferson was a woman who had lived many lifetimes in her 76 years. Her skin, rich and deep like the earth beneath her feet, told stories of survival, of love and loss, triumph and defeat. Her silver hair, twisted neatly into a bun, was not just a mark of age, but of wisdom earned through decades of facing the world that never seemed to know how to truly see her. Sitting on her porch, she rocked gently in her chair, each creak of the wood blending into the symphony of crickets chirping and the rustle of wind through the rose bushes that framed her view. This porch wasn't just wood and nails. It was the place where she had given birth to her children, buried her husband, and weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical. It was her refuge, a quiet rebellion in a world that had too often overlooked the power of stillness. With each sip of her chamomile tea, she let the warmth spread through her, her gaze sweeping over the street that had seen her grow, change, and endure. Meadowville, once a vibrant and tight knit black community, had long since shifted. Gentrification had taken hold, and the faces that once filled the streets had either moved away or been pushed out, replaced by unfamiliar ones who looked at Clara with curiosity, sometimes suspicion. Yet, despite the whispers and sideways glances, Clara remained. She had become a fixture in this town, not out of choice, but out of necessity. She had seen too much, fought too hard, to simply disappear. So she stayed, unmoved, unshaken. The new neighbors crossed the street to avoid her, avoided making eye contact, as if her presence on that porch, her refusal to fade, was a reminder of something they didn't want to acknowledge. Clara wasn't bitter. No, she was beyond that. But she was deeply aware of how invisible she had become in the very place that once embraced her. Still she sat, still she smiled, still she watered her garden each morning and swept her porch each afternoon. Her quiet defiance was in every motion, in every breath. Today, just like every other, the world would turn, but Clara Jefferson would remain. Meadowville had changed in ways that Clara Jefferson couldn't ignore, though she never complained. She had lived here long enough to witness the ebb and flow of time. But now, as the years slipped by, the town she once knew seemed like a distant memory. 50 years ago, it had been a thriving black community, a place where the air hummed with laughter, the streets were alive with the sound of children playing, and front porches were sacred spaces for family, wisdom, and shared meals. Neighbors had once been family, scolding your children one minute and feeding them dinner the next. It was the kind of place where unity was not just an idea, it was lived daily. Clara could still remember the late night church meetings during the civil rights movement, the marches that spanned miles, the freedom songs that filled the air, and the wise conversations that had floated through the warm summer nights. The smells of barbecues, the sounds of dominoes being slapped on tables, and the distant murmur of elders passing down their knowledge beneath the soft glow of porch lights were part of her soul. But all of that had faded. One by one, her neighbors were forced to leave. Some passing on, others priced out by rising rents and gentrification. Now, the once vibrant community of Meadowville was quieter, its soul replaced by newly arrived families who looked at Clara with confusion. She saw their eyes lingering on her, their uneasy glances as they passed by. They didn't know her, and truth be told, they didn't want to. She wasn't bitter, no, but she felt the sting of invisibility each time she saw them cross the street to avoid her, clutch their purses tighter when they walked by. They didn't understand the weight of history that rested in her bones, the legacy she carried in the small, fragile home where she had raised her children and buried her husband. To them, she was just an old woman in an old house. But Clara wasn't going anywhere. No, she was still here, on her porch, still standing firm in a world that tried to make her disappear. She had survived too much, seen too much, and no matter how many new faces filled the street, she would be the constant, a quiet reminder of everything the town had once been and everything it had forgotten. That evening, the air hung thick with the last breath of summer, heavy with the kind of heat that clung to your skin and made every movement feel slow. Clara sat in her rocking chair, the familiar creak of the wood like a comforting melody. Her chamomile tea sat beside her, the steam still rising in delicate tendrils from the chipped ceramic mug that proudly declared, "Black and proud since '63." The world around her faded into a quiet, rhythmic hum, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the distance, the rustle of the maple leaves above, and the faint whispers of a passing breeze. Her gaze drifted lazily over the rose bushes she had nurtured with her own hands, their colors vibrant under the setting sun. There was nothing extraordinary about the moment, and yet, for Clara, it was everything. It was peace. It was defiance. It was a battle she had won simply by surviving. Across the street, Lindsay Parker, the ever so perfect HOA board member with her tight ponytail and even tighter personality, walked her miniature golden doodle. Clara's eyes followed her briefly, noticing the way Lindsay stiffened as she approached her house. The young woman's pace quickened, and for a brief moment, Clara could feel the unease radiating from her. Lindsay's eyes flicked toward Clara's porch, then immediately down to her phone, holding it higher, a tighter grip, as if Clara might somehow reach out and snatch it away. Clara let out a long, slow breath, her face unreadable. She'd seen it all before. She had seen the way Lindsay and others like her looked at her, with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, as though Clara didn't belong in this neighborhood anymore. She had become a relic, a presence that didn't fit into the carefully manicured lawns and freshly painted homes of the newcomers. But Clara didn't flinch. She never did. She had learned long ago to wear her silence like armor, to let the whispers, the looks, and the assumptions roll off her like water on stone. So she remained, unmoved, unbothered. Her presence was her power. Her stillness was her protest. And as Lindsay walked past her house, still clutching her phone as if Clara might pose a threat, Clara simply rocked, steady and unyielding, knowing that in her silence, she was making a statement the world couldn't ignore. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the street as the afternoon heat lingered in the air. Inside her home, Lindsay Parker's hand trembled slightly as she dialed the familiar number, 911. Her voice, when it finally came, was stiff, the words spilling out in a rush, each one flavored with the growing anxiety she couldn't quite mask. "There's an elderly woman sitting on her porch, acting strangely," Lindsay said, her tone tight, laced with a mixture of fear and judgment. "She's been peering into windows, looking at things she shouldn't." There was a quiver of unease in her voice, but more than that, there was a hint of something else, something rooted in assumption and suspicion. As she spoke, the operator listened with practiced detachment, scribbling down notes, the call moving from Lindsay's frantic tone to the calm professionalism of the dispatcher. "We'll send someone right away." The operator reassured her, but Lindsay's concern didn't dissipate. Her mind raced, her eyes flicking over to Clara's porch again, where the woman sat so still, so unmoving, it felt like a threat in itself. The The suspicion in Lindsay's chest began to coil tighter, and before she knew it, two sheriff's deputies were on their way. The sound of the siren cut through the stillness of Meadowville, a sharp wail that seemed to echo in time with the sudden rush of tension in the air. Within minutes, Officer Troy Conincade and Officer Miller arrived, their patrol car pulling up in front of Clara's house, tires crunching over the cracked pavement. The scene seemed almost surreal. Clara's porch, a place where years of history had unfolded, was now the stage for a new kind of drama. Conincade, with his hard eyes and a demeanor that screamed authority, stepped out first, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. Miller followed, his uncertainty evident in the way he lingered behind his partner, hand hovering near his holster, ready for anything. As they approached, the weight of the moment settled over them like a heavy fog. Clara's gaze, calm and steady, met theirs with an unspoken challenge. They had come to investigate a report, but they didn't know they were walking into something much bigger than they had bargained for. Clara didn't flinch. She just watched them, her presence commanding the space around her, as if the very air knew this was not a woman who would be easily moved. The tension in the air grew thick as the deputies approached Clara's porch, their boots making a sharp, deliberate sound against the weathered steps. The heat seemed to press down on everything. Even the faint rustling of the leaves was swallowed by the heaviness that hung between them. Clara sat unmoved, her posture unwavering, as if she were made of the very wood she rested upon. Officer Conincade's eyes, cold and calculating, studied her intently, while Miller, his younger counterpart, seemed less sure, his steps faltering slightly as they reached the porch. The silence stretched, the kind that amplifies every sound, the distant hum of cicadas, the soft thump of the old rocking chair as Clara gently rocked back and forth. Conincade cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am," he said, his tone already laced with suspicion, "what are you doing out here?" The question hung in the air, unnecessary and accusatory. Clara didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She had been through this before. The looks, the assumptions, the expectation that she would shrink. But Clara had spent a lifetime learning how to stand her ground, how to hold her own against a world that tried to ignore her. "I've been sitting on my porch since early afternoon, enjoying the evening," she replied softly, her voice steady and unshaken, as though it was the simplest thing in the world. The words weren't a defense. They were a declaration. Conincade's eyes narrowed, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "At this hour?" His words dripped with insinuation, but Clara, with a calm that could have frozen the air, met his gaze without blinking. "Is there a problem with that?" she asked, her voice still soft, but now carrying an edge. She could feel Miller's uncertainty, the way he hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how to proceed. But Conincade was different. He pushed forward, demanding answers, his voice rising just enough to show his growing frustration. "What were you doing looking into windows, ma'am?" he demanded. Clara remained still, her gaze steady. She had no intention of letting him twist her words or manipulate her. "I'm not looking into any windows," she said, her voice quieter now, but the weight of the truth in it was undeniable. "And you're mistaken if you think I'm here to answer for your assumptions." The silence that followed was thick, pregnant, with the unspoken weight of everything that had led to this moment. The deputies stood there, their power slipping away with each calm word she spoke, as Clara's quiet defiance slowly began to reshape the reality they had tried to impose. The deputies hovered in a tense, uncomfortable silence, their questions hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Conincade's gaze hardened, his body language tightening as he leaned in, the weight of his authority pressing down on Clara. The oppressive heat seemed to thicken, every second stretching like a lifetime. His voice, now sharp, sliced through the stillness. "We've had reports of suspicious activity," he said, his eyes narrowing. "A woman matching your description has been seen looking into windows. Do you care to explain what you were doing in the past hour?" Clara's eyes didn't waver, and her hands, weathered but steady, rested calmly on the arms of the rocking chair. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her gaze, firm and unyielding, locked with his as she took her time, her voice unwavering. "I've been sitting right here since this afternoon, enjoying the evening," she said, her words deliberate, each one laced with quiet authority. She spoke slowly, as though the truth, so simple and unassailable, needed no defense. Her calmness seemed to unsettle Conincade. He stepped closer, the heavy sound of his boots on the porch a prelude to the storm he seemed intent on creating. His eyes flicked to Miller, who was standing slightly behind him, shifting nervously. So, you're saying the witness lied? Conincade's tone was accusatory now, dripping with skepticism. Clara's lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't raise her voice, didn't challenge him in the way he expected. Instead, she simply looked at him, the weight of her years pressing down in the quiet space between them. I'm saying your witness is mistaken, she said. Each word measured, calm, but imbued with an underlying strength. Or perhaps their imagination got the best of them. Conincade's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck tightening as he processed her words. The tension escalated as Miller glanced from his partner to Clara, his discomfort palpable. But Conincade was relentless, pushing forward with questions that only further underscored his own desperation to turn nothing into something. You can either come with us, he said, his voice growing harsher, or you can stay here and face obstruction charges. Clara's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. She didn't flinch. She didn't rise from her seat. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice low but firm, every syllable an immovable rock. If you want to arrest me, you'll have to physically remove me, and I promise you, I won't go quietly. The words landed between them like a shot, a stark declaration that no badge, no assumption would bend her will. The moment Clara's calm words settled in the air, everything seemed to pause, as if the universe itself had taken a breath. But the oppressive tension didn't last long. From a distance, the low rumble of an approaching engine broke the heavy silence. Tires skidded on the asphalt, a different sound from the usual cruisers. This was a black SUV, sleek and purposeful, its windows tinted, gliding down the street with a precision that cut through the thick humidity of the evening air. The rumble of the engine filled the space between Clara's porch and the deputies, reverberating in the bones of the onlookers who had begun to gather on their porches, watching from behind half-drawn curtains. Clara's eyes didn't flicker with surprise, didn't move in any way that betrayed her. She knew who was coming before the SUV even turned the corner. And when the door swung open, she didn't need to stand or lean forward. Elijah Jefferson stepped out, tall and sharp, his Navy uniform gleaming in the fading light. His presence, calm yet unyielding, shifted the very air around him. The deputies froze, their aggressive postures faltering. Elijah didn't hurry as he made his way toward the porch, each step deliberate, measured, as though the ground beneath him recognized the weight of the moment. His eyes, steady and fierce, locked onto Conincade and Miller. They had no idea what they were up against. The moment Elijah arrived, everything changed. There was no question who held the authority now, no question whose presence commanded the street. As he walked forward, his every movement carried the assurance of someone who had fought battles not with words, but with action. He stopped just in front of Clara, and the deputies took a step back instinctively, like wolves realizing they had underestimated their prey. Elijah didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to say much at all. The sheer force of his presence, the authority radiating from him, made Conincade and Miller realize their mistake. And just like that, Clara's quiet, unwavering resistance had summoned someone who would make sure they knew just how wrong they were. The world shifted in an instant, and it was clear. They weren't just dealing with an elderly woman on a porch anymore. They were facing Commander Elijah Jefferson, and the power dynamic had changed forever. The air thickened as Elijah stepped onto the porch, his presence as commanding as the weight of history itself. The deputies, still caught in the tension they had started, were now painfully aware of the gravity of their mistake. Conincade's posture stiffened, his earlier arrogance slowly slipping away, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He had expected to intimidate, to control, but now he was face to face with a man whose power was undeniable, whose calm was unshakable. Elijah didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, cut through the confusion. He turned toward Conincade and Miller, his eyes piercing through them like a blade. What's going on here? Elijah's voice, though quiet, resonated with authority. It wasn't a question, it was a demand for clarity. And in that moment, both deputies knew the game had changed. Conincade hesitated, glancing at his partner, but neither of them made a move. The reality was sinking in. They were no longer dealing with a helpless old woman. They were facing someone who commanded respect, someone whose presence alone shattered the assumptions they had built their actions upon. Elijah spoke again, his tone sharp but composed. "This is my mother," he said, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of decades of sacrifice and love. "And I don't care what report you got or what you think you saw. You do not approach her like this." His words landed with the force of a strike, the echo of his calm authority washing over them. Conincade, his jaw clenched, began to speak, but Elijah cut him off, his eyes unblinking, unwavering. "You approached an elderly woman sitting on her porch. You tried to detain her, and for what?" The question lingered, thick with the accusation of every unjust action ever taken against people like Clara. "Because she didn't fit your image of who belongs here." Elijah's gaze hardened. "You're not just dealing with my mother," he continued, his voice growing colder. "You're dealing with a commander in the State Bureau of Homeland Security. You've misjudged this, and now you're going to answer for it." The truth of his words struck like thunder. Conincade stood there, momentarily stunned, the weight of his assumptions crumbling under the weight of Elijah's calm yet cutting power. And for the first time, Miller, still standing uncertainly beside his partner, seemed to realize that everything had shifted. The tension in the air was palpable as Elijah stood before the deputies, his calm demeanor cutting through the chaos like a blade. Conincade, the hardened officer who had stepped onto Clara's porch with the assumption of authority, now looked small, his chest tight with the realization that his judgment had been wrong. The cold edge of Elijah's voice, steady and unyielding, forced him to reconsider everything. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Elijah's words sliced through the air, his gaze unwavering as he locked eyes with Conincade. There was no more question in his tone. It was the certainty of a man who had not only earned his place in the world, but who was now demanding respect for the legacy he carried. "I'm Commander Elijah Jefferson," he continued, his presence commanding the space around him. "This is my mother you've just tried to intimidate, and I'm done watching you push people like her around." The silence on the porch grew heavier, but Clara remained a quiet pillar of strength in her chair, her eyes watching the exchange with a quiet, steady pride. She didn't need to say anything. Her son's arrival had already spoken volumes. Conincade's eyes flickered from Elijah to Clara and then to Miller, who looked like he wished he could sink into the ground. The weight of the situation was settling in, the truth of their error beginning to unfold in real time. Elijah's words, sharp and measured, had dismantled every assumption they had carried with them. "You came here for a report, but you found something much bigger," Elijah said, stepping forward with a slow, deliberate pace, his eyes still locked on Conincade. "What you've done is not just a misunderstanding. It's a failure of judgment, of protocol, and of respect." The air seemed to shift once more, as if the ground itself had drawn a line beneath their feet. The deputies, once brimming with authority, now stood under the weight of their actions, the pressure mounting with every word Elijah spoke. Finally, with a single steely glance, Elijah concluded, "You're not just going to walk away from this. You'll answer for it." The finality in his tone left no room for doubt. This moment, as it unfolded, was about to ripple far beyond this porch, this street, and Meadowville itself. Elijah had drawn the line, and the world had just been forced to take notice.